By the time I turned into my apartment complex, my hands were already tight around the steering wheel, not from traffic, not from a bad day at work, but from that sinking, all too familiar feeling in my chest, the kind that tells you you're about to spend the next 20 minutes circling like a desperate idiot just to find a place to park near your own home. And then I saw it, one single open spot, the last one, and right next to it, a group of strangers laughing, grabbing stacks of flyers from the trunk of a car that didn't belong there. That was the moment I decided. I was done being patient. If you've ever come home exhausted only to find someone else taking what's yours, if you've ever felt that quiet rage build up over something small that just keeps happening again and again, then go ahead, hit like, subscribe, and settle in because this one ends with a kind of quiet revenge that feels way too satisfying. I wish I could say this story starts on that Friday, but honestly, it started weeks before that. Maybe even months. Because the real issue wasn't just one car, it was the constant feeling of being overlooked, like my time, my space, my comfort didn't matter. I live in a medium-sized apartment complex. Not fancy, not terrible, just one of those places where everything works fine until it doesn't. The kind of place where management hands out parking passes like they're meaningless, completely ignoring the fact that there are way more cars than actual parking spaces. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, how bad could it get? Pretty bad, it turns out. By 4 p.m. every single day, the lot is full. Completely packed. Doesn't matter if you worked a double shift, doesn't matter if you're sick, tired, or just mentally drained. If you don't make it back early enough, you're out of luck. And when I say out of luck, I mean parking blocks away, walking alone in the dark, carrying groceries, bags, sometimes even just dragging your exhausted body home step by step. And yeah, I'm a woman living alone. So that walk, it's not just annoying. It's stressful. Every shadow feels a little too close. Every passing car makes you glance twice. It's the kind of thing you get used to but never really feel okay about. At first, I tried to be understanding. I told myself, everyone's dealing with the same problem. I even adjusted my schedule sometimes, rushing home just to secure a spot. But life doesn't always work like that, right? Some days you can't leave early. Some days you're stuck. And on those days you just hope that maybe just this once, there'll be something open. But there rarely is. And what makes it worse? It's not even just residents anymore. Over time, I started noticing random cars, unfamiliar ones, parked for hours. No passes. No stickers. Just sitting there like they belonged. Visitors, delivery drivers, sometimes people from neighboring buildings, all taking advantage of the fact that no one really enforces the rules. Every time I saw one of those cars, something inside me tightened. Not explosive anger, just this slow-burning frustration. Because it wasn't fair. We pay to live there. We deal with the stress, the inconvenience, and then someone else just slides in and takes the last spot like it's nothing. And management? They always gave the same response. We'll look into it. We'll monitor the situation. Please be patient. Patient. That word started to feel like an insult. Because patience didn't change anything. It didn't magically create more spaces. It didn't stop people from parking wherever they wanted. It didn't make those long, uncomfortable walks feel any safer. It just meant keep dealing with it. So yeah, by the time that Friday rolled around, Good Friday, ironically, I was already running low on patience. Actually, scratch that. I was completely out. That day had been long. Not horrible, just draining in that quiet, exhausting way. The kind of day where all you want is to get home, kick off your shoes, maybe sit in silence for a bit. No drama. No problems. I remember pulling into the entrance of the complex and immediately noticing how full the lot looked. My stomach dropped a little, that familiar dread creeping in. Great, I thought. Here we go again. I started circling. One row. Full. Second row. Full. Third row maybe? No. Full again. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep myself calm, but I could feel it building, that frustration pressing against my ribs. My grip on the steering wheel tightened just slightly. Just one spot, I whispered under my breath. That's all I need. And then, I saw it. At the far end of the lot, tucked between two larger vehicles, a single empty space. Relief hit me instantly. My shoulders dropped. I actually let out a small laugh, like I had just won something. Finally. But as I got closer, that relief started to twist into something else. Because standing right next to that spot was a group of people. 6, maybe 8 of them. All dressed similarly. All holding stacks of bright flyers. They were gathered around the trunk of a car. That car, pulling out more papers, chatting, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. I slowed down as I approached, my eyes flicking between them and the empty space. Something felt off. They weren't residents. I knew that immediately. I've lived there long enough to recognize most faces, or at least the general vibe of who belongs and who doesn't. These people? They didn't belong. One of them closed the trunk and said something I couldn't quite hear, and then, almost like a coordinated move, they all started walking away together, heading out of the complex. Leaving the car. In that spot. My spot. I just sat there for a second, engine still running, staring at the empty space that wasn't really empty anymore. It felt like someone had dangled a solution right in front of me, and then snatched it away at the last second. And that's when I noticed the flyers in their hands, the words, Easter service, printed across the top, something about inviting people to attend. Missionaries. Of course. I watched them walk out of the gate, laughing, completely unconcerned, like they hadn't just taken one of the most valuable things in that entire complex, a parking space, and abandoned it like it didn't matter. My jaw tightened. I could feel that slow burn turning into something sharper now. Something more focused. Because this wasn't just bad luck anymore. This was someone choosing to take advantage of a situation at the expense of people who actually lived there. And, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like being patient. Not this time. I stayed parked right there in the middle of the lane for a few seconds longer than I should have, my engine still running, my eyes locked on that car like it had personally offended me. And in a way, it had. It wasn't just a vehicle anymore, it was a symbol of everything that had been building up inside me for weeks. The late nights, the long walks, the feeling of being ignored. And now a group of complete strangers casually taking up space in a place they didn't even belong, then walking off like it was nothing. I could have just left. Honestly, that's what I'd done every other time something like this happened. I'd sigh, shake my head, and go find parking somewhere else. That was my pattern. Avoid conflict, deal with it quietly, don't make a scene. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the way they laughed as they walked away, or maybe it was just the timing, the fact that I was already so mentally exhausted. Whatever it was, I felt something shift inside me. A line I didn't even realize I had just been crossed. I slowly pulled forward and parked my car along the curb, technically not even a legal spot, but I didn't care. I turned off the engine, but I didn't get out. Instead, I just sat there, staring at that car again, replaying the situation in my head. They don't live here, they don't have a past, they're not even staying, they just left it. The more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it felt. It wasn't just inconsiderate, it was entitled. Like they assumed no one would question it. My fingers tapped lightly against the steering wheel as my mind started racing through options. I could ignore it. I could wait and hope they came back soon, or I could finally do something about it. And that last option? It started to feel less like overreacting and more like correcting something that should have been enforced a long time ago. I grabbed my phone, unlocking it with a quick motion, and pulled up the contact for the leasing office. For a second, I hesitated. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I knew once I made that call, there was no going back to being the quiet, patient resident anymore. This was me choosing to act. Choosing to push back. I pressed call. It rang twice before someone picked up. A familiar voice. One of the office managers. Calm, slightly distracted, like they were juggling 5 things at once. Hi, this is the front office. How can I help you? I took a small breath, steadying my voice. Hi, yeah. I'm a resident here, and I just got home, but the lot is completely full again. There's actually a group of people who parked here, non-residents, and they just left their car and walked out to go door to door with flyers. They don't have a parking pass, and honestly, it's making it impossible for actual residents to park. There was a brief pause on the other end. Not silence exactly, more like processing. Oh, okay, she said slowly. Do you know what kind of car it is? I glanced over, quickly describing it, color, make, approximate location. As I spoke, I could feel my heart beating just a little faster. Not from fear, but from that strange mix of adrenaline and anticipation. Like something was finally about to happen. "All right," she replied. "We'll look into it." That phrase again. For a split second, I almost felt that familiar wave of doubt creep in. The one that says, nothing's going to change. But this time, I didn't let it settle. "Okay," I said, a little more firmly, because it's been happening a lot lately, and there are residents who literally can't park when they get home. She paused again, and this time her tone shifted slightly, more serious. "I understand. We'll handle it." I ended the call, placing my phone down on the passenger seat. For a moment, everything felt still. Too still. Like the calm before something, I don't know, final. I leaned back in my seat, exhaling slowly, my eyes drifting back to that car. It looked so normal. So ordinary. Like it didn't belong in the middle of this situation. But I knew better. Because right now, that car was the center of it all. Minutes passed. 5, 10, maybe 15. I stayed there longer than I expected, scrolling through my phone half-heartedly, but never really focusing. My attention kept snapping back to the parking lot, to the empty space that should have been mine, to the silence left behind by that group who had just disappeared. And then, finally, movement. At first, it was just the faint sound of a vehicle approaching. Low, mechanical, steady. I looked up instinctively, my eyes scanning toward the entrance of the complex. And that's when I saw it. A tow truck. My chest tightened, but not in a bad way. It was more like validation. Like everything I had been feeling, all that frustration, all that quiet resentment, it was finally being acknowledged. Not ignored. Not brushed aside. Actually handled. The truck rolled in slowly, almost deliberately, like it already knew exactly where it was going. I sat up a little straighter, my attention fully locked in now. This was really happening. It pulled up right behind the car. No hesitation. The driver stepped out, calm, professional, like this was just another routine job. But to me, this felt like something bigger. Something earned. I watched as he walked around the vehicle, checking details, confirming something on a device in his hand. Every movement felt precise. Intentional. There was no rush, no doubt, just quiet execution. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me again. Not anger this time. Not frustration. Relief. Because for once, I wasn't the one adjusting, compromising, or walking away. For once, something was being done. And as the driver started hooking up the car, preparing to lift it, I couldn't help the small, almost involuntary smile that formed on my face. Because deep down I knew they weren't going to see this coming. I didn't expect to stay, but I did. Something about the moment felt too important to just walk away from. So I remained there in my car, engine off now, hands resting loosely in my lap, eyes fixed on the tow truck as if looking away would somehow make me miss it. The entire atmosphere had shifted. Just minutes ago, this place felt like every other frustrating evening, tight spaces, silent annoyance, that sense of helpless routine. But now? Now it felt like something was finally unfolding in my favor. The tow truck driver moved with calm efficiency, the kind that comes from doing the same job over and over again. No hesitation, no second-guessing. He crouched slightly near the rear tires, adjusting the equipment, metal clinking softly against metal in a way that somehow felt satisfying. Each sound echoed a little louder in my mind than it probably should have. It wasn't just noise, it was progress. Action. Consequence. I found myself leaning forward just a little, elbows resting on the steering wheel, watching closely as the lift slid under the car. There was something almost surreal about it. That car, just moments ago sitting there like it had every right to be, was now being quietly, methodically removed. No argument. No warning. Just gone. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like the one being inconvenienced. I remember thinking, this is what it should have been like all along. Rules aren't complicated. If you live here, you park here. If you don't, you don't. It's that simple. But somewhere along the way, that simplicity got lost, buried under inaction and excuses, and people taking advantage of the gaps. The driver stood up, walked back to his truck, and began operating the controls. Slowly, the car lifted, just enough for the wheels to leave the ground. There was a slight creak, a shift in weight, and then it was secure. Final. I felt a strange sense of closure just watching that moment, like something inside me was finally settling. And then, I noticed something. Movement near the entrance. At first, it was distant. Figures approaching, small and slightly blurred by the fading light. But as they got closer, I recognized them instantly. The same group, the same people who had walked out earlier, without a second thought. Still holding a few leftover flyers, still talking among themselves, but now, their energy felt different.
Slower. Confused.
My posture straightened almost immediately. They hadn't seen it yet. The tow truck was positioned just far enough that it wasn't the first thing you'd notice when walking in. But they were getting closer, step by step. And I could feel this quiet anticipation building in my chest, like I was watching a scene play out in real time, knowing exactly how it was about to end, while they had no idea. One of them, tall, maybe mid-20s, wearing a light-colored shirt, started looking around first.
You could see it in his body language.
That slight pause. The way his head tilted just a bit, scanning the lot. Something wasn't lining up in his mind. He said something to the others. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the reactions. A couple of them turned their heads, glancing around more carefully now. Their steps slowed. The casual rhythm they had earlier was gone, replaced with something sharper. Concern, maybe. And then one of them pointed, right at the tow truck. I felt my breath catch slightly as all their attention snapped in that direction. It was almost immediate, the shift from confusion to realization. You could see it hit them all at once. The widened eyes, the sudden stiffness. That moment where everything clicks into place and you realize something is very, very wrong. They picked up their pace. Quick steps now, not running but close. Urgency replacing that earlier ease. The tall one moved ahead of the group, his expression tightening with every step. I watched as he approached the driver, hands slightly raised, clearly trying to get his attention. The driver, however, didn't rush. He looked up, acknowledged him, but didn't stop what he was doing.
Calm.
Professional. Unmoved. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly from where I was, but I didn't need to. Their body language said everything. The man gestured toward the car, his movements sharper now, more animated. There was a clear edge of panic there, even if he was trying to keep it under control. The driver responded with something short, likely procedural. Maybe asking for proof, maybe explaining the situation. Whatever it wasn't what the man wanted to hear. Another person from the group stepped forward, joining in. Then another. Suddenly, that calm little gathering had turned into a cluster of overlapping voices, all focused on the same thing, trying to stop what was already in motion. And I just watched. Not with guilt, not with hesitation, but with a quiet, steady sense of justice. Because this wasn't random. This wasn't unfair. This wasn't someone being targeted for no reason. This was the direct result of a choice, a simple, careless decision to take something that wasn't theirs and assume there'd be no consequences. The driver shook his head slightly at one point, pointing toward something, probably referencing the lack of a permit, or the rules of the complex. His tone didn't change.
His posture didn't shift.
He had a job to do, and he was doing it. The tall man ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, clearly frustrated now. I could almost hear the thoughts running through his mind. How did this happen? Why didn't anyone warn us? Can we fix this? But the truth was it was already done. The car was lifted, secured, ready to go. One of them looked around, almost desperately, like they were hoping to find anyone, who could undo the situation. Their eyes scanned the lot, passing right over me, without a second glance. To them, I was just another resident, another background figure. They had no idea. And that was the part that hit me the most, not in a cruel way, but in a deeply satisfying one. Because for once, I wasn't the one powerless in the situation. I wasn't the one adjusting, accommodating, silently dealing with someone else's actions. I had made a choice. A small one, maybe.
Just a phone call.
But that call had changed everything. The driver climbed back into his truck, clearly done with the discussion. The engine rumbled to life, low and steady, cutting through the tension that had filled the air. The group stepped back instinctively, their energy now completely different from when they first arrived. No more laughter. No more ease. Just frustration and the slow realization that they couldn't stop what was about to happen. I felt my chest rise with a quiet breath as the truck began to move.
Slowly.
Deliberately. Pulling the car away. And as it rolled forward, out of that space, out of that lot, I felt something inside me finally release. Not explosively. Not dramatically. Just a quiet, steady exhale of everything I'd been holding in. Because in that moment, I got something I hadn't felt in a long time. Fairness. As the tow truck slowly rolled toward the exit, dragging that car behind it like a quiet consequence finally catching up, the entire parking lot felt different. Lighter almost. Not because of the extra space, though that mattered, but because something had finally been enforced. Something had finally worked. I watched until the truck disappeared past the gate, the low rumble of its engine fading into the distance, and only then did I realize I had been holding my breath. And just like that, it was over. The group stood there for a few seconds longer, almost frozen, like they were still trying to process what had just happened. One of them pulled out their phone immediately, probably calling someone, maybe the towing company, maybe whoever they were reporting to. Another just stared at the empty spot, hands on his hips, shaking his head in disbelief. Their entire energy had collapsed inward. The confidence, the casual laughter, the sense of control gone. Replaced with frustration, confusion, a little bit of embarrassment too. I didn't stay much longer after that. I didn't need to. The moment had already given me what I didn't even realize I'd been craving for weeks. So I quietly stepped out of my car, the evening air hitting my face as I locked the door behind me. For once, I wasn't bracing myself for a long walk in the dark. For once, I was already home. And that feeling? It hit deeper than I expected. I walked over to that same spot, the one I had been circling for earlier, the one that had been taken so casually, and stood there for just a second. It sounds small, almost ridiculous, but in that moment it didn't feel small at all. It felt like reclaiming something. Not just a parking space, but a sense of control over my own environment. I got back into my car and moved it properly into the spot, aligning it carefully, almost deliberately. The engine turned off with a soft click, and for a second, I just sat there again, hands resting lightly on the wheel, looking out at the now quiet lot. Everything looked normal again, but it didn't feel the same. Because something had shifted. I grabbed my bag, stepped out, and locked the car. As I started walking toward my building, I could still hear faint voices behind me, the group, still talking, still trying to figure things out. But I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Whatever conversation they were having, it didn't involve me anymore. For once, I wasn't the one affected. I reached my door faster than usual. No long walk, no scanning over my shoulder, no balancing groceries awkwardly while trying to stay aware of my surroundings. Just a short, simple walk. Safe.
Easy.
The way it should have always been. Inside my apartment, everything was quiet, familiar, comfortable. I kicked off my shoes, set my bag down, and leaned back against the door for a second, letting out a slow breath I didn't even realize I was holding. My body felt lighter, like some invisible weight had been lifted. And the strange part? It wasn't about revenge in the dramatic sense. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel guilty either. I just felt justified. Because I hadn't done anything wrong. I didn't yell at them. I didn't confront them. I didn't make a scene or try to escalate things emotionally. I simply used the system that was supposed to be there in the first place. The same system that had been ignored over and over again until now. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and just stood there for a moment, staring out the window toward the parking lot below. From this angle, I could barely see anything, just a few scattered lights and shadows moving around. But I knew what had happened down there. I knew how quickly things had shifted. And I couldn't help the small, quiet smile that formed again. Not because someone else was having a bad day, but because for once I wasn't. That night felt different. Calmer.
More settled.
I made myself something simple to eat, turned on a show, and for the first time in a while, I wasn't half distracted by irritation or that lingering thought of, what if I don't find parking tomorrow? It was just peace. But the story didn't completely end there. Because the next morning, That's when the ripple effect really started to show. I stepped outside a little earlier than usual, coffee in hand, the air still cool and quiet. As I walked past the parking lot, I noticed something almost immediately. There were more open spaces. Not a lot, but enough to feel noticeable. Enough to make me pause for just a second and look around more carefully. Cars that had been sitting there for days, unfamiliar ones, were gone. The kind you start to recognize when you're constantly struggling to find parking, suddenly not there anymore. And near the entrance, a small sign had been placed. It wasn't huge or dramatic, but it was clear. Parking enforcement notice. Permit required. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed. I let out a soft breath, almost like a quiet laugh. So it wasn't just a one-time thing. That one call, that one moment of finally saying enough had actually done something. It had triggered enforcement, awareness, maybe even a bit of caution for anyone thinking of doing the same thing again. And that's when it really sank in. This wasn't just about me getting a spot that night. It was about setting a boundary that had been ignored for too long. I took a sip of my coffee, glancing around the lot one more time before heading off, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I didn't feel that usual tension sitting in the back of my mind. Because now there was a system again. And more importantly, it was finally being used. The next few days didn't feel dramatic. There was no big confrontation, no one knocking on my door demanding answers, no sudden explosion of conflict. But that was exactly what made it so powerful. Because instead of chaos, what followed was something much quieter, something far more satisfying.
Change.
Real, visible, undeniable change. At first, it was subtle. The kind of thing you only notice if you've been paying attention for a long time. I started coming home around the same time as usual, mentally preparing myself for that familiar routine, slowly driving through every row, hoping, calculating, bracing for disappointment. But then, I'd find a spot. Not always the closest one, not always perfect, but a spot. Available. Waiting. And every single time it happened, there was this brief moment where I'd pause and think, wait, really? That constant tension I used to carry? It started fading without me even realizing it. My shoulders weren't as tight when I pulled into the complex. My grip on the steering wheel wasn't as stiff. I wasn't scanning every corner with that same anxious urgency. It was like my body had been stuck in a low-level stress mode for weeks, and now, finally, it was learning how to relax again. And it wasn't just me. You could feel the difference in the entire environment. Other residents seemed calmer too. I started noticing people actually parking without that rushed, competitive energy. No more circling endlessly. No more irritated glances at each other, like we were all silently competing for survival. It felt organized again.
Fair.
And that sign at the entrance? It stayed. Clean, clear, impossible to ignore. Every time I walked past it, I felt this quiet sense of validation. Not pride exactly, but something close. Because I knew deep down that moment, that single decision to stop being passive, had played a part in all of this. But what really stayed with me wasn't just the improved parking situation. It was that moment, their moment. The look on their faces when they realized the car was gone. That shift from confidence to confusion, from confusion to panic. Not because I enjoyed their distress, but because it represented something so much bigger than just them. It was the exact moment where entitlement met consequence, where assumption met reality. Because, let's be honest, they didn't think anything would happen. They parked there thinking it was harmless, temporary, that no one would care enough to do anything about it. And for a long time, they would have been right. People like me, we just dealt with it. Stayed quiet, adjusted, but not that day. And that's what made it different. That's what made it stick. I remember one evening about a week later. I came home just as the sun was setting, casting that soft golden light over the buildings. The lot wasn't empty, but it wasn't overflowing either. There was space, breathing room. I parked easily, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a second looking around. Everything felt normal. And that's when it hit me. This was what I had been wanting all along. Not revenge in some dramatic, over-the-top sense. Not conflict. Not confrontation. Just fairness. Just the simple expectation that if something belongs to the people who live here, then it should actually be available to them. And it took something so small to restore that. A phone call, a decision, a moment of finally saying, "No, this isn't okay anymore." I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the car, locking it behind me, and as I walked toward my building, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Not just because parking was easier, but because something inside me had shifted too. I wasn't just the person who quietly tolerated inconvenience anymore. I was someone who acted when it mattered. And that realization stayed with me. Even now, every time I pull into that lot and see an open space, there's this small, almost unnoticeable smile that forms. Not out of spite, but out of recognition. Because I know exactly what it took to get here. No yelling, no drama, no confrontation. Just one calm decision at exactly the right moment. And honestly, that kind of quiet revenge, the kind where everything simply falls into place without you having to raise your voice, where the system does exactly what it was supposed to do, where fairness restores itself without chaos, that's the most satisfying kind there is. Sometimes, people think revenge has to be loud to matter, that it has to involve confrontation or big emotional reactions. But the truth is, the most powerful kind of justice is often the quietest. It's the moment where you stop accepting what's unfair and simply let consequences do their job. If this story made you feel that same sense of satisfaction, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. What's a moment where you finally stopped tolerating something and took action? And trust me, you're going to want to stick around, because the next story, it might just be even better.